All right, well, hello. Welcome, everybody. I love doing that. That's so fun. All right. I was just going to share a little something with you first. I'm bucking the trend. In my old age now, I'm getting old. My strength must have really improved. I mean, all at one time, I can lift $100 worth of groceries. I mean, just that. Anyway, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. I need my glasses, probably. I'll try. I'm good. So, as usual, a big Warwickian welcome. Glad to have everybody here, members and friends, free staters. Welcome guests, ladies and gentlemen of the WCHS. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Pleasure to greet you all today at the Old Ward Courthouse. Thank you so much. This will be so much easier. Aren't they stylish? It's a pleasure to greet you here today at the Old Ward Courthouse. Once the seat of power for Little Warwick County, and still all these years later, it's a true community center. I mean, the proof is here today. So thanks for coming out. The formal authority may have left this building many years ago, even before Elvis did. But the community's never stopped coming. They're coming through the doors, and today is living proof of that. And to all of you Warwickians, Denbyites, and Newport Newsians, and friends from every corner of what was Old Warwick County, or maybe even Greater Warwick County, like your Hampton, New York County, that's just Greater Warwick County. Your presence here today on this last acre means quite a bit. So, as with everything in life, change comes relentlessly. Across these very grounds marched upheavals of the Civil War and 2 world wars. Through them ran railroads and shipyards. Around them exploded populations. Exponential growth arrived, and it was great. But at the same time, so did annexations, written into Virginia law. Parcel by parcel, expanding city of Newport News, incorporated in 1896, and they were already bursting at the seams at the time. They were chipping away at Warwick's borders. One might say Newport News developed quite the appetite for real estate. Warwick kept shrinking the way your favorite sweater shrinks in the brother. Little here, little there. By the end, our county had been through more boundary adjustments than a pair of pants after Thanksgiving dinner. All right, and beyond the maps and politics, the long, steady, tedious rhythm of farming, dairying, oystering that had defined this place for centuries, it began to feel for many too hard and too slow. People looked forward to what seemed an easier, more profitable life. Many were drawn away to the shipyard or somewhere else. Skipping ahead, the county was beginning to no longer resemble its former self under constant development. And after a lot of hullabaloo, the final chapter of that story was written July 1st, 1958, when Warwick County was consolidated out of existence. Warwick County, with Denby at its seat, was figuratively washed and tumbled dry by the great forces of American history. Population expansion, manifest destiny, manifest development. What remains for us, the Warwick County Historical Society, are the soft, lint-like remnants, the stories, documents, and memories. It's not much that we have left, but those fragments tell a thoroughly American tale, and we need to continue to try to preserve it, and we do that. So now, before we turn to our program, I want to draw your attention to the colorful newsletters on the tables before you. Our newest article comes from Mrs. Dawn Worsham. The Consent of the People, Securing the Rights and Liberties of British America. It's thoughtful, well-researched, thoroughly worth your time reading. So please join me in thanking Dawn for her work. We've also been fortunate over these past 19 years, to benefit from the steady, excellent work of other writers, contributors, such as Fred Polk, Gloria Rogers, Mary Kay, Mark Wagner, even Patrick and Courtney have contributed over time. Their deep knowledge of the local history and genealogy deserves recognition. I don't know, like an award or something. On behalf of the entire society, thank you guys. Appreciate it. and I'm quite certain you guys have heard plenty enough from me. So if there's anyone who has any matters to bring before the society, we will do it after our program. I don't want to take up our speaker's time. In that vein, let's get our speaker introduced, and for that, we will have a great day. Thank you, ma'am.
Good afternoon. It's my pleasure, as I always say, to introduce our speaker. No matter who our speaker is, it's always my pleasure. And it's always my pleasure, before I introduce the speaker, to regale you with many announcements. So, here we go. Our next program will be in September, Virginia Prisoners of War during World War II, Catherine Coker. So just put that on your calendar, and of course you'll receive an email reminder. And the program after that, yours truly will be speaking on the Merci train. And as part of that talk, I will be giving it several times at other places. I think by now everyone probably here knows what the Merci train is. It's a boxcar in the Virginia War Museum that was used during both World Wars to transport American troops to French battlefields. So there's a special gallery that will open on the 1st of October at the museum, and there will be a dedication ceremony on Saturday, October the 3rd, from 2 to 3:30. It's open to the public. Be a lot of fun. A short ceremony with ribbon cutting, followed by French refreshments and lots of fun activities. So I encourage you to come to that. And if you didn't get enough of that, then you can hear that same talk again at the Lee Hall Depot for one of their Rail Heritage programs in October. And while I'm on the subject of the Lee Hall Depot, their September program, let me see the date here, it will be, I don't have the date, but yes I do, September the 9th, which is a Wednesday evening at 7 p.m., the Panama Railway, which is a lesser known topic, so that's going to be a lot of fun. It will be presented by Albert Burkhart, who is the secretary of that organization at this time, and a wonderful historian. We've had him speak here to us. So if I got you all completely jumbled with dates, you can just ask me afterwards and I'll go over all that again. Again, I'm delighted to be able to tell you a little bit about our speaker today, who is Father Andrew Fisher. He is a priest. Can't tell that from his collar, then we might need to send you back to refresher school in Sunday school. He hails from Alexandria. Currently, he is the priest of the Diocese of Arlington. However, he served in many parishes, and presently he is at St. Timothy Church in Chantilly. And also, you're his sister, right? No. Is that correct?
My assistant.
Your assistant, okay. Well, maybe your sister, but certainly not your wife. Your assistant. What's your name, dear? Wonderful, thank you. So Andrew, he is a native, as I said, of Northern Virginia, and he was raised in Alexandria. He attended seminary at Mount St. Mary's University in Emmitsburg, Maryland, where he played, and this is a special note if you Google him, 4 years of NCAA Division I baseball, ... and was ordained in 1998. Now, I don't know if those two facts connect to each other, but in any case, unique backgrounds. He has served as a parochial vicar of St. William of York Church in Stafford, Queen of Apostles Church in Alexandria, and the Cathedral of St. Thomas More in Arlington. He was also a director of liturgy at the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception in Washington, D.C. He is known for his leadership, particularly in parish instruction. He has directed the work at one in particular. While he was the pastor at St. Andrew's Parish in Annandale, he oversaw the construction of a new Romanesque-style church that was following a 14-year project that was supported by 3 capital campaigns. In order to be able to facilitate this, he raised over $10 million. Yes. So at that dedication, which was on December the 11th, 2023, he told Catholic Herald, and I quote, "Many parts of the new church's design, including the red brick exterior, seek to imitate the Basilica of St. Ambrose in Milan, where the saint is buried. We are also honored that the Basilica of St. Ambrose gave our parish a 4th century brick from that actual tomb of St. Ambrose, unquote. He called that brick the cornerstone of the new church. He holds many positions. I'm going to kind of cut it short here, but you are a magistral chaplain for the Order of Malta, a knight of the Equestrian Order of the Holy Sepulchre, chaplain for Catholic Athletes for Christ, and a member of the Historical Commission of the Martyrs of La Florida. Now that's the one I want you to remember, the Martyrs of La Florida, because it's in that capacity that we have invited him here today to speak to us about his work to honor the Spanish Jesuits who lost their lives while working to establish the Catholic faith in the New World. In particular, he's going to enlighten us today about the 7 Jesuits who came to Virginia in 1570s to attempt to spread Catholicism to this area. And I don't want to let the cat out of the bag. I think some of you who read the description know already know that they perished, and that was unsuccessful. But I'm not going to say any more, and so I'd like to leave him something, the story to share. So if you will come on up, Father, and we so appreciate you being here today, and we'll dim the lights now.
Very well.
Thank you so much. I'm a convert. I make that joke because I grew up inside the Beltway, and now I love Tidewater. I come down here often for research, so I have fallen in love with a part of the state of Virginia that I did not know growing up. So, and I'm glad you're here. I'm glad I have a chance to explore and be back in the Tidewater area. I give talks on this topic frequently, and oftentimes it's a captive audience. They're students. They can't go anywhere. But I'm always happy to give it for Historical Society because I have people here who want to be here, who are like sponges, who want to know the history of their people, their family, their connections, their neighborhood. And I wish more people were like that. Where I come from up inside the Beltway, there's constant turnover. Every 2 or 3 years, because of the Pentagon, because of the military, because of politics going on, people move. I'm a lifelong Virginian, but I'm a rarity. But to come down here and meet families and people who can trace generations going back, it's incredible. So it's good to be here in Tidewater, and I'd be remiss if I did not say a special thank you to Mary. I contacted Mary about a year ago, trying to fact check a few pieces for the book I was working on. It'll be out in the spring. And I wanted to come down and ask her, because I knew of her specialty, the history of this area. And Mary quickly, in this very room, pulled out maps, pulled out books, said, that's exactly true, this. And then, to my great joy, she said, in fact, I'll take you to the waterfront and give you the rest of the tour. So all she needs is a tour bus. We went down there and had a great day. So thank you so much. I appreciate your wisdom and expertise. And you are in the book. You are footnoted. Thank you very much. All right, let's get started. Virginia has an incredible history. Virginia has a long and sophisticated Native American history. In 1607, the English come. They, with great perseverance, scrap through and keep Jamestown going, the first elected form of government in the New World. What takes place at Jamestown quickly spreads to Williamsburg, the House of Burgesses. Again, the government, the colony grow. And from Williamsburg will come names a century after Jamestown you recognize. Washington, Jefferson, Mason, Madden, Patrick Henry. And so all eyes look to Virginia. We're rightfully proud of the Commonwealth. But I'm here today to talk about a small little footnote, literally just a few months of history. But that history in Virginia, not far from where we are today, I'd like to think changed the world. Because originally, before 1607, Virginia on European maps is called La Florida. And it was on Spanish maps into the care of Spain. And so when these Jesuit missionaries came in 1570, they were coming from Florida to Florida. And in fact, some of the letters written that I can refer to in my talk, all are signed with the date, the river, and it says, from La Florida. Did you know that? Did you know you're in La Florida? We were in the 1570s, welcome to Florida. It sounds warm and sunny, doesn't it? Oh, yes. But had the Jesuit mission succeeded, Spain would have continued to send more and more efforts to settle. It didn't. And because of the catastrophe that took place here, Spain basically wrote off Tidewater. And within a few years, England, seeing this, made their move. And we'd say the rest is history. But anyway, because of what took place here in the Tidewater area, the history of Virginia changed, the history of America changed, the history of the Catholic Church changed, and the history of the world changed. That's my talk. Thanks for coming today. I really appreciate your time and attention. Thank you. Let's go back. All right. 1492. Columbus. Oh, come on, class. We have to go here, right? 1492. Columbus sails the ocean blue, right? We learn a lot growing up about history. But my talk today is about a piece of history that's only recently been rediscovered. This is from the Jamestown Museum. And in 2007, when they opened up the new building, they now have a room called Pre-Jamestown. And this is there. And I grew up on field trips to Colonial Williamsburg and Jamestown in grade school. None of it was ever mentioned. I was in my last year before getting a master's degree in American history when I first heard about this. I was almost with a master's degree, never heard of this. It's not in any of the textbooks. So the Jamestown has it as of 2007. And along the Colonial Parkway, right by College Creek, the U.S. Park Service put this up in the 1960s. And here's our story for today. Attempted settlement. They want to make sure Jamestown is known as the first settlement, because it survived, but the attempted settlement. A small group of Spanish Jesuits attempted a settlement in Virginia in September 1570. They are said to have entered James River and landed along this creek and crossed the peninsula to establish a mission near York River. 6 months later, all were massacred by the Indians, save for one young boy. He is rescued by a relief expedition in 1572. And this is the group I'm going to speak about today. So currently, the Jamestown Museum and the Colonial Parkway are the only two places you will find this. However, working with some historians recently, we submitted to the Virginia Office of Historical Resources. They have approved it. And in the spring, they'll put up a roadside marker nearby where they died. So coming soon, a third. But that shows you, only in the last few years has this even become a topic of information. All right, back to our story. 1492, Columbus sails the ocean blue. Columbus is sailing to India to engage Spain into... He has 3 ships, yes. He's sailing to India because of a growing silk and spice trade. And he hopes to get there quick and start economic relations. However, when he makes landfall in what is today the Caribbean, he thinks he's off the coast of India. And so he calls the islands the Indies. In fact, for the first 100 years, Spain called all of North America the Indies. And when he met people on these islands, he called them Indios, in Spanish writing, which is where we get the word today, Indians. They're not Indians, they're Caribbeans, but because he thought he's on the way to India, they were people of India. And so that is how the Spanish arrived in the Caribbean. They first go west to Mexico. Cortez arrives there. They call it New Spain. They go farther south. They start exploring South America. Columbus sees one nation with beautiful rivers and islands in them. It reminds him of his days visiting Venice. And so he names that land Venezuela. That's where my friend Maria is from Venezuela, named after Venice. Columbus sees that. He sees 3 islands together. In the Caribbean, he calls it Trinidad. The 3 islands, the Trinity. And in 1515, Spain sends an explorer north called Ponce de Leon. And he sees a big island. He sees it on Easter Sunday, 1515, and so he says, oh, look at all the flowers in bloom on Easter Sunday. And so he says, I will call this island La Pascua Florida. That island is actually the state of Florida today. He didn't realize it was not an island, he just saw land, but it's called the Easter Flowers. That's where Florida comes from. Ponce de Leon has 2 attempted settlements. He actually gets wounded in the second one with a wound that will prove fatal. But they've now discovered this huge body of land, and they realize that this is going to be strategic for them. Not only is it a huge body of land, but they also discover, Ponce de Leon, that the wind and water currents push ships quickly up the coast, and farther up the coast, out into the ocean, back towards Spain. We call that the Gulf Stream. Spain sees this as important because they have huge galleons, these big fat boats filled with textiles and precious metals from Mexico and the Caribbean. They want to send it back to Spain, but when their big slow boats get in the express lane here, like an Easy Pass, they go twice the speed. And so Spain wants to make sure that La Florida is under their territory so that all their treasure ships can go. So they continue efforts to explore La Florida. 1526, 2 Spanish explorers go north, make it all the way to Chesapeake Bay. It's the first Spanish maps we have of Chesapeake Bay. They're very ambiguous, but at least we know by 1526 they were there. And the explorers call it the Bay of Mary, Mother of God. Baja de Maria, Madre de Dios. So in some of the letters from the 1500s, I look up and it says, signed Bay of Mother of God, La Florida. That's the return address in the letter. The Bay of Mary, Mother of God. That was the Spanish name given to the Chesapeake Bay. Okay, by the 1560s, they're looking for ports up and down the East Coast to start building garrisons. Think of Monopoly. Every few steps, one other hotel on the Monopoly board. Spain wants more and more garrisons. They discover lowlands and deep ports in South Carolina, and in 1561 they send an expedition to explore South Carolina. And while there, a storm comes up, scatters the ships, and one of the ships, the Santa Carolina, is blown so far out to sea, it takes a week for them to find their way back to the land, and they don't know where they are. And as they go into this large body of water, they have to find a coast where they can stop and get provisions, fresh water, maybe some food, make repairs, and somehow find their way back. And while they're there, they check the maps, and they realize they're in the Chesapeake Bay. As they go in the southern Chesapeake Bay, they see Native Americans. They make contact. It's peaceable. We don't know how they communicated, because the Spanish didn't speak Algonquin, the Algonquins didn't speak Spanish, but they had a good interaction. And according to the Spanish side of the story, of course that's the only side we have at this point, the chief offers his teenage boy to go with the Spanish back to Spain because the people of this area, the Algonquins, have a tradition of exchanging young boys, and they'll do this with the English of Jamestown to learn your language and culture so that now you can have a diplomatic back and forth with them. And so in July 1561, a teenage boy who they identified as a prince, a son of a chief of nobility, and his companion that we like to think of as probably a chaperone or bodyguard, they leave and go back to Spain. It takes them about 2 weeks to get across the ocean to Spain. They first arrive in Largos, Portugal, which are sheer cliffs. I've been there, it's rather ominous. And then they make their way to Seville, Spain. And while they arrive in Seville, Spain, the captain of the ship gets out and immediately sends letters to the King of Spain saying, I have nobility with me from the New World. You need to meet him because you want to make sure you make a good diplomatic relations with this young teenage boy. That is not a photograph of the boy. They had no photographs in 1500, sorry. Sometimes little kids ask that, how do you look like? I said, no. But I will say this, if you were an Algonquin or Powhatan Indian in July, would you be dressed like this? What would you be wearing? Nothing. Not even a loincloth. In their minds, that got in the way of hunting and warfare. And if you were a man, your whole life was about hunting and warfare. So he probably had no clothing. That raises an issue because you're about to go meet the King of Spain in royal court. Very posh. And so we have the captain of the ship not only write a letter to the King of Spain, we have from the House of Trade a request for a clothing allowance for the young prince. And he is granted from Spain 12 ducats, 12 coins. And And so he probably goes to Kohl's or wherever you get clothes back in the 1500s, and the young teenage prince gets his first European clothing. And this is important because in the book he writes the name of the prince, Paul Kikineo. The only time he ever written down, Paul Kikineo. And what's interesting is it's not an Algonquin word. It's going to several Virginia Indian scholars. It was probably a Spanish version of what the name sounded like. But this one time, we have the teenage prince's name, Paul Kikineo. He goes for about a 5-day hike with the ship's captain. Just him, they leave the bodyguard behind, to the King of Spain, King Philip II, the most powerful monarch in all of Europe. And Paul Kikineo gets put up at not a hotel, but the Royal Palace in Madrid, still there today. Can you imagine what it must have been like for this teenager from a settlement in the James River where most native communities were no larger than about 75 to 100 people, because that's about the farming you could supply and care for. He would have seen cobblestones. He would have heard church bells. He would have seen horses, not indigenous to North America. Church bells, buildings made of brick. Can you imagine going to the royal court and seeing ladies in their hoop skirts with powder and perfume, men with their white wigs, harpsichords and violins playing? Can you imagine, as he arrived in Seville, because Spain and Portugal were international, seeing dark-skinned people from other continents, light-skinned people from Asia? Can you imagine? I always like to think that teenage boy was exploring the old world. If we talk about Columbus exploring the new world, Paul Kikineo was exploring the old world. And there he was. He stays as the personal guest of the king for about 8 months. And all the documents of this time say he befriends the king, they become very good friends, and he never needs a translator. So it's our understanding he picked up Spanish very readily, which is true. It took me a long time to learn Spanish. In fact, I'm still learning from friends. But if you teach little kids, they pick up a new language pretty quick. So Paul Kikineo, 15, 17 years old, picks it up pretty readily. In the spring of 1562, he begs the king to go back to his homeland. He gets homesick. King says, I understand, I'm sending you back with 2 missionaries. They were religious priests from the Dominican order, founded by St. Dominic. And they'll go with you, and they'll teach your people about Jesus. And Paul Kikineo said, that's great. Because Paul Kikineo now speaks Spanish, he wears Spanish clothes, eats Spanish food. But Paul Kikineo never got baptized. The one thing, he was able to fit into European culture, but never baptized. He said, that's fine, I'll take them and they can be my people. So Paul Kikineo gets sent to New Spain, Mexico. And it's there, after only a day in Mexico, he and his bodyguard get deathly sick. In fact, they're on their deathbed. And the doctors tell the prince, there's nothing more you can do, you're going to die. I'm sorry. And he says, well, if the medicine's not working, try your God. So the head Dominican in Mexico City takes him to the cathedral and baptizes him. And within a few days, he is fully healthy again. So now he's a Christian. Now there's a problem. He's no longer a ward of the states. Now, under church law, he belongs to the local bishop. And the bishop of Mexico City says, I will not permit him to go back to his homeland because he'll lose his faith among people who are Christian. So for 4 years, he's in limbo. 4 years, Paul Kikineo is living at the Dominican College and Church, 1 block from the Cathedral of Mexico City, still there today. For 4 years, he's there starting to study Spanish history, Spanish language, and Spanish religion. But when you get baptized in the old days, you took a Christian name. Paul Kikineo was not a Christian name. So, since he was about to die and was a friend of the king, the governor, or we'd say the viceroy of Mexico, a Spanish noble, he said, I will be the godfather. And so he said, I'll give him my name, Luis. So from this moment on, the spring of 1562, Paul Kikineo is now called Luis, where most documents call him Don Luis, because Don is a title of nobility, like Don Juan. So all the documents from the time of his baptism now call the prince from the Chesapeake Bay Don Luis. For 4 years, Don Luis lives here. The church is still there. It's now a community college in Mexico City. But Don Luis for 4 years lives there, studies the Dominicans, and finally, the governor of Florida, who was just in charge of the treasure fleet, intervenes and says, we need this boy to help us start something moving up to protect the treasure fleet. And so he gets permission to take him. In 1566, June, July, a ship run by the Spanish treasure fleet with 2 clergy as missionaries, 30 Spanish soldiers, and Don Luis. His bodyguard is never mentioned again. We probably think he died when they were ill and sick. They make their way up. Unfortunately, when they get up and land on the east coast of the United States, they say, Don Luis, you're home. He goes, no, it's not my home. He says, it's too sandy, it's too beachy. And from the ship's log, looking at latitude and longitude, we believe they landed at the Outer Banks. I would love to be a missionary at the Outer Banks. Unfortunately, Don Luis says, not my home. And a storm is brewing, so they have to sail out to sea because if you're in an unfamiliar area, you can get beached. So the safest thing is take the ship a couple miles offshore, right out the water. When the storm passes, they make a second attempt. This time they land and they say, Don Luis, you're home. And he says, still not my home. Longitude, latitude, we believe it was probably in Chicotig Island, which is the very fingertip of Maryland, sitting in the Chesapeake Bay. Again, not my homeland. Don Luis now has to sail back out because the storm is on them again. But this time there's a greater storm. All the Spanish on board ship are low on supplies and want to go home. So they make a vote. Don Luis doesn't get to vote, and they go back to Spain. Don Luis was so close to coming home. 1566, after 4 years, he doesn't. They go back to Spain. King Philip puts him now not into the hands of the Dominican group of priests, but a newly formed order of priests called the Jesuits. And he gets sent to the University of Seville, and there is enrolled in the Jesuit College, which is now the University of Seville Department of Fine Arts. And my last trip there, I've done 4 research trips to Spain. At the time that Don Luis was living here, he was classmates with, has anyone ever heard of Man of La Mancha, Don Quixote? Does anyone know the author of that book? Miguel de Cervantes. He was a classmate here. There's a plaque on the wall that in these years Cervantes studied here. Don Luis, this Indian prince from Virginia, the title of our area, was classmates with the man who wrote Man of La Mancha, Don Quixote. He's there for over a year, and while he's here, as a Catholic now, he makes his first Holy Communion, the Eucharist, and confirmation. He's now fully initiated to the Catholic Church. But something is going on. The French, this is the church inside, still open today. In 1565, while Don Luis is in Mexico, the French attempt to start a settlement in Florida. And so the head of the treasure fleet is pulled and put with an armada to stamp out the French. The French and the Spanish are not good friends at this time. They arrive off the coast of North Florida on the feast of St. Augustine, and they have a great victory over the French, so they name the Spanish settlement that begins there St. Augustine. Very good, yes. 1565, St. Augustine. The founder of it, Pedro Menendez de Aviles, gets named the governor of La Florida, which means all of North America at the time. Pedro Menendez de Aviles quickly begins putting missions all up and down the East Coast. You can see them there between 1565 and 1568. He puts them there, he builds a garrison, starts a settlement, and brings Catholic missionaries in to teach, to baptize, to preach the gospel. In doing so, he realizes he needs more help, and so he contracts with the Jesuits to become the official missionaries of Spain and Florida, and they staff all of these. And why is that important? Because there's Pedro Menendez de Aviles. He says, I need to bring them over like soldiers, wave after wave, so that we can not only build Spanish empire here, but bring the Catholic faith as well. So he makes friends with the head Jesuit who arrives in 1568, Pedro Menendez de Aviles. The head Jesuit is Father Juan Bautista de Segura. I've been to the archives in Rome. The Jesuits were under obedience to write reports every couple of weeks. So it's great. We have all these updates from Florida, what life is like. Two things he reports in 1568. The Native Americans are intelligent and spiritual. They will respond well to preaching. He said the greatest obstacle is Spanish soldiers. Spanish soldiers don't know how to farm in this new land. So when they get hungry, you know what they do? With guns and swords, they take the food from the natives. And so it's hard because the Catholic priests go and try to teach them about a God of love and mercy, and the Spanish soldiers are then taking their corn. And there's a great letter from one Spanish soldier in modern-day Tampa Bay who says he's worked for 6 months and has the entire village ready for baptism, and the day before the baptism, he says that a fight breaks out, 2 natives are killed, and then the Spanish are all evacuated. And he writes this letter saying, on board ship, as I sail away from the bay, I can see all of my converts will never get baptized. So the Spanish are rather upset. So he says, what I need to do is I need to go someplace where the natives have never seen a Spanish soldier before. There'll be no corruption. And then the governor says, you know what? I know a teenage prince from Chesapeake Bay. 1 ship has visited, no settlement. Why don't you go to Chesapeake Bay and begin settlement and begin preaching the gospel? And he can help you because he's now a Catholic and he can translate for you. And so in the spring of 1570, the governor, the head Jesuit, all meet with Don Luis in Havana, Cuba, and put together the mission to Chesapeake Bay. And this is where we get to Virginia. In July of 1570, they meet at the northernmost Spanish garrison in South Carolina, modern-day Paris Island Marine Depot. Any Marines here? Semper Fi. Did you go through Paris Island?
Yes, I did.
So this monument is right next to the golf course. This was the Spanish garrison. And it was here they had a meeting of all the Jesuits working in Florida. And Father Segura, the head Jesuit, chooses the mission team. He will lead it with one of the priests, 3 Jesuit brothers, 3 young men who are thinking about becoming priests. They're called catechists. They take about a 12-year-old altar boy from South Carolina and Don Luis. I tell that, people always giggle. And I said, yes, if I ever get sent into a life and death, dangerous information area, I would certainly bring altar boys, have their parents sign permission slips for field trips. Yes, of course. But anyway, there they go. But I want to point out to you, the Jesuit mission team to Ajacan. When Paul Quiquineo Don Luis goes back to Spain, they begin asking him to give information. And they say, where are you from? And he gives the name of his homeland as Ajacan. So in many Spanish maps, Chesapeake Bay, Norfolk, Tidewater area is all called Ajacan. That'll come up later in conversation. All right. They sail in end of August 1570 for the 10-day journey from South Carolina up to Chesapeake Bay. They meet 2 storms. It takes almost a month. They arrive September 10th, 1570. They have no water. They're out of food. In fact, they've had to break into the food reserved for the Jesuits for the first 2 weeks of the mission site. Not good. They enter Chesapeake Bay, and they sail for 3 leagues along the coast, shadowing it, and coming up to the first finger of land, which we know today is, right, Hampton, Newport News. Why is this important? And why did I come down to see Mary and the Historical Society here? The ship's captain gave an interview 10 years after I dropped them off, reiterating how many leagues and some of the topological, some of the landscape of the area. So we know that from Cape Henry, going west, shadowing the land, they came to the mouth, he says, of a big river, deep port. They sailed in, and there along the coastline, the northern coastline, they stopped, and they had Mass for the first time. So the first Catholic Mass said in the Commonwealth of Virginia, September 10th, 1570, on what would be the northern mouth of James River, which would be Newport News. He says it's unique because all of the area they've seen so far in the Chesapeake Bay have been sandy beaches and marshlands, but they said where they stopped at the northern mouth of this great river, there were actually plateaus. You've been down to the the point where the Navy Yard is, you can still see the plateau. If you go down by Monitor Merrimack Park, you can see it's buffeted up by concrete. You can see there were actually plateaus there on a bluff. And it says also the port is deep. The ship could get up close to land. This is unique for the mouth of James River. That's why Norfolk Navy Base is here. And that's why here it's so easy to get up close to land. And that's why George Benjamin West, one of the most famous residents of Newport News, in his memoirs would say that his family estate looking out to the water built piers out because the ships could get up close to land. Lastly, it says when he goes up on land to say the first Mass, he says it's surrounded on the bluff by large pine trees. Do you know in the Tidewater area, the Newport News Point is one of the largest areas of loblolly pines in the Tidewater area. In fact, I found a letter from 1950, a member of Warwick County complaining to the Virginia arborists that they're cutting down trees to make a parking lot for the Mariners Museum, and the trees are over 500 years old, all loblolly pines. Yeah. So all the descriptions from the ship's captain meets and is satisfied by right here in Newport News. Thank you, Newport News. You've made my job easy. They have the first Mass, they see Native Americans, they get back in the boat, they sail up 12 leagues upriver, and there they come and find a lagoon. It says a small finger of fresh water. Because at this point, James River is still coming. But right at College Creek, there's a small finger of land and a freshwater lagoon. And it says there, and it's about 12 leagues up from the mouth of James River, they see natives. Don Luis says, these are my people. They unload at College Creek. And that's why the sign is put there by the National Park Service. College Creek, just north of what would be Jamestown Island. It's there at College Creek. They learned that this was Don Luis's brother is the local chief. However, Don Luis's family is from over on the York River. But Powhatan and some of the powerful families would often appoint family members to cover different chiefdoms if there was a need of, shall we say, better political leadership. So Don Luis's brother says, welcome back, good to have you here. A lot's happened while you're gone. A famine's been going on for 7 years. People have died, people have gone inland. This is what's left of us. And by the way, I have a young child here in my village who's dying. And what should we do? And Don Luis remembers, hey, these guys dressed in black from Spain, I was dying, they baptized me. Maybe they should baptize this baby too. So the Jesuits at College Creek performed the first recorded Christian baptism in the state of Virginia, September 11, 1570. So now we have the first Catholic Mass, the first Christian baptism. Father Segura makes the decision, we're going to stay, we're not going to leave. And so they send a 2-page letter back to Havana begging for farming tools and seed as soon as possible. Now, the fall months are tornado and hurricane season, so they know they have to hold on to January. But they said, we'll make it through. Don Luis's family will protect us and take care of us, send food so we can feed our natives, our new flock. And so it is. They are here. They travel across the peninsula. They say they travel about 2 leagues, about 7 miles, which goes from College Creek over to York River. Kings Creek, Queens Creek, on the York River, presently on the property of the Yorktown Naval Weapons Station. It took me 12 years, but I finally got on. The archaeologists there took me for a tour around, and this is one of the photos I was privileged to take. But this is where they built the mission, right next to a large native settlement called the Kiskiak tribe. And so there's a scholar at William & Mary, Martin Galvan, who has been permitted for the U.S. Navy to do 3 digs there. And he's the expert on Kiskiak. I've interviewed him, and he certainly in his book supports the fact that the Jesuits would have built their settlement, their mission, on the periphery of the land, which would put them nearby Queens Creek or Kings Creek. All right, September 1570, all's well for the first week. Don Luis says, I wanted to get permission to go to visit my uncle in the neighboring village. I'll get food for us for the winter and get some more converts for you. Don Luis says, let me go by myself because you Europeans don't know the trails like I do. You'll slow me down. He's come back in a few days. Don Luis goes, never comes back. They wait about a week and they get worried. Where's their translator? They don't speak Algonquin. Where's their protector? And finally the Jesuits, they spread out and they find him and he's returned to his native people. He's taken his place back as a member of royalty. He now has several wives. He's renounced his Christianity and he says, I want nothing to do with the Spanish or with the mission. The Spanish missionaries also know that the local people are no longer trading with them. They've been shunned. So now they go through the winter, living off acorns, roots, anything they can find that has not been picked over by the other people. They're getting sick, they're starving, they want to hold on to January, and then a rescue ship, a supply ship would come and get them. It's horrible. They go through much suffering. January comes, no supply ship. They literally, Father Segura, the Jesuits, on his deathbed, he can't get out of bed. So he sends the other priests, Father Quiros and two of the brothers, to go talk to Don Luis to beg for resources. They find Don Luis, they beg, and Don Luis says, okay, you head back and I'll come later with supplies for you. On the way back, through the woods, which we estimate probably around modern-day city of Williamsburg, Don Luis ambushes the three. Don Luis and the warriors fill them with arrows, two die on the spot, but one of the brothers escapes into the woods, and in the morning, the Algonquins are excellent hunters, they follow the blood trail, and they finish him off. This would be February 4th, 1571. The Jesuits remaining at home base on the York River wonder what happened to our expedition. Obviously, they fear the worst, and in their daily prayers, they're praying for them to be returned. On February 10th, 1571, Don Luis arrives at the mission site and they finish off the rest of the Jesuits, except for the altar boy. The Algonquins have a tradition of not killing women and children in combat, because the altar boy obviously was youth and also not dressed as a Catholic priest or Catholic religious, and they let him live. As he's being dragged into the mission, he gets locked in there as they're being picked off. But when they're done, he says, Don Luis sits down on the ground and begins to weep. Obviously, there was still some friendship with these men who had brought him back, and at one time were their friends. He begs through the window, through the chapel, let me die with them. And they won't. He says, well, let me bury them. So Don Luis and the altar boy dig a trench and bury those Jesuits in the trench, forming twigs and crosses in their hands. And they're buried there, what would be under the building. They built one square building cut in half side the chapel, half side the dormitory. Where are their bodies? We don't know. But if we find that chapel, we'll probably find the bodies. Some people say, too bad the Navy won't let you dig there. And I always say, thank God the Navy is there, because as you discover the rest of the Tidewater area, thanks to colleges and urban growth, they would have easily put a McDonald's there, or a hotel or something there, right? We're talking at William and Mary and Christopher Newport just up the street. That's prime property. But the Navy's never touched it, so some respect was given to these Jesuits years later. All right, really quick. Give me another few minutes, I'll answer some questions. So now we have the lone survivor. Don Luis wants to kill him. He says the Spanish will come back, find out what we did, and kill all of us. You don't know the armory they have. But his comforters say, look, we don't do that. That's just not our way of life. So they sell him to a chief in another village, which we believe is probably down by modern-day Hampton. And is there for 2 years. He lives as a servant of the chief. But remember that January supply ship? It came in September. Should have used Amazon, next day service, right? So in September of 1571, the supply ship returns. They pull up into James River. Natives come out on canoes and begin to attack the Spanish ship. They grab 2 of the warriors, pull them in, and evacuate. Off the Florida Keys, one of the Virginia Indians escapes. The one they keep, they bring him back to Havana, and somehow they find out from him there's at least one of the party still alive. And so they put a rescue mission together. But remember, that time of year, you don't sail in the fall. So it's now the fall, August of 1572. Pedro Menendez de Aviles, the governor of Florida, brings 5 ships up, parks them in Chesapeake Bay at the mouth of James River, and only takes the flagship up James River and lays a trap. He tells all the priests and soldiers to hide below deck. They put a table out with biscuits and honey, and he and a few Spaniards invite natives on board ship. And like any fine restaurants, there's different shifts that come on board, different seatings. The third shift coming aboard is the local chief. He's dressed in clothes as an entourage. What he's wearing around his neck is jewelry, what we call a paten. It's a small silver or gold plate that goes on top of the chalice the priest uses in Mass. He's wearing it as jewelry. So the governor gives the signal. All the soldiers and Jesuits come up, and they have about 18 natives they put into binds. And then he begins to question them. Who's involved? Where do we find Don Luis? Where's the lone survivor? And so they release one of the captured natives to go back and ask for Don Luis and the teenage boy. A few days later, the teenage boy returns. His name is Alonso de Amos. One of the Jesuit priests on board ship is taking notes of this. He comes, he's naked, he has trouble speaking Spanish for 2 years. He's only spoken Algonquin. The governor puts him on board ship, puts him under oath, calls court to session because he's the governor. And it's the first telling of the story. And so we have that letter, 2.5 pages long, written by one of the Jesuits, dated August 28th, 1572, Bay of Mary, Mother of God, La Florida. And it begins by saying, as the boy tells it. In other words, the lone survivor lived, and he told the story. That lone survivor would live for another 5 years until he got killed as a militiaman back in South Carolina in a battle going on there. But during those 5 years, he gave 7 interviews to court officials and to church officials. And his 7 testimonies are the basis of our cause of canonization, our investigation into that. 4 more minutes. We're good? Still awake? All right, good. I always say, I'll play a game now. What questions are you asking? After doing this talk for 10 years, I can try and answer them right now for you. How do we know where the mission site is? I'm glad you asked. First question, how do we know the mission site? Remember I said that when you asked Don Luis, where are you from? He said, I come from Oaxaca. Right? That sounds like the Algonquin word for house, Yahakan. Wouldn't you expect a teenage boy to say, where do you live? He said, in a house. So many Algonquin scholars feel that when the Spanish asked him, where are you from? Where do you live? He said, in a house, Yahakan, or Yahican sometimes pronounced. And that's why the Spanish wrote down what they heard, Oaxaca. In the late 1800s, a scholar in New York wrote a talk for the New York Historical Society, and he said that he believed that it was a phonetic spelling of Occoquan, which is modern-day Woodbridge, Virginia, on 95, nearby Quantico Marine Base. Occoquan. And Oaxacan was the indigenous name, the Spanish misspelled it. And he called them the Martyrs of the Rappahannock. When they marched down from Occoquan, they were stopped not at the James River or the York River, but at the Rappahannock River in Fredericksburg. But he ended his talk by saying, but I have no evidence of this. A few years later, a scholar at Georgetown said, no, too long a walk. They landed at Occoquan and they marched to Aquia Harbor. Because Aquia sounds like Oaxacan. Aquia, Oaxacan. And so in the 1920s, when the Catholic Diocese of Richmond was the entire state, they put a marker up at Aquia Harbor with the names of the Jesuits who died in 1571. And so this was, with no evidence, simply by, it sounded like Algonquin language, they said this is where the mission was. Everything changed in the 1950s. 2 Jesuit priests, scholars, went to Rome and started pulling the letters from both the priests and the ship's captain. And lo and behold, today 95% of scholars say it was on the York River, because the ship's captain and also the priests who were there, their explanations of distance and landscape all matched with Newport News, the first Mass, College Creek where they disembarked, and York River, where the mission was, and their site of death. In the early 2000s, a thought came forward, well, maybe it was the intersection of the Diaskin Creek and Chickahominy River, modern-day Towano area, New Kent County. There's a large indigenous settlement there, and many people believe that. Also, there was a Colonial Williamsburg scholar who had an idea about Don Luis's identity, and that would have put Don Luis's home there. That was not Don Luis's house or the Jesuit's house in the 1500s, just a nice picture from a real estate agent where the two come together. But today, I'd say 90% of scholars believe that they lived and died on the York River, and it is in that region where the state of Virginia will put the historical marker in the spring. Question number 2, what happened to Don Luis? That's what everyone wants to know. Yes, priest can read minds. Good, all right. Don Luis, what happened to him? As a historian, I'll be serious and say we don't know. He disappears from history. The Spanish didn't know. The English never talked about him. We don't know. But that would be a boring answer, right? I came all the way down here, and you give me a nice lunch. I have to entertain you with something. So I'll stop being a historian, and now I'll get into what we call speculation. Isn't that fun? Now we can talk off the record, right? In the 1950s and 60s, the head of Colonial Williamsburg said that when John Smith came, he met, in the early 1600s, a chief, a brother of Powhatan, who hated the English with a passion, and who waged war and twice almost wiped out Jamestown. His name was Opie-Con-Canoe, or sometimes pronounced Opet-Con-Canoe. And the scholar said, wait a minute, age-wise, he could have been Don Luis. And the fact that, unlike all the other Virginia Indians, he hated Europeans, maybe that was Don Luis. So that's an image of Opie-Con-Canoe, or Opet-Con-Canoe, that the English wrote at Jamestown. John Smith says that when he did 3 journeys through the Tidewater area, his first journey, right around Christmas, 1607, he arrives at the Kiskiak village, and he says he got a cold reception. He said it's one of the few indigenous towns he went to and got a cold reception. Why are the people of Kiskiak so hesitant to talk to Europeans? Again, this guy, Colonial Williamsburg, said, well, again, probably because if that's true, if that's the village where they died, they might be scared. The English thought, they would say to us, we are ready for battle. Opie-Con-Canoe, do you know what his name means in Algonquin? Any Algonquin speakers here? I know about 3 words in Algonquin, don't be impressed. It means one whose soul is white. In other words, you're a native, but you've been influenced by white-skinned people. Don Luis lived among the white people, right, the Spaniards, for almost a decade. And he spoke their language. And at one point, he worshipped their gods. In the 2010, another director of Colonial Williamsburg, likewise, his name is James Horn, he's a scholar, he likewise wrote a book on his theory that Don Luis was later known by the English under the name of Opie-Con-Canoe or Opet-Con-Canoe. And why do I tell you this? And this is a drum roll, please. Because, thank you. When Pocahontas, yes, we're talking about Pocahontas, when Pocahontas falls in love, not with John Smith, but she marries Ross. They explain to Pocahontas, you're getting married in Jamestown Chapel, according to our Christian customs. Your daddy has to walk you down the aisle. That's what dads do for brides. So they tell Powhatan, the supreme chief, you gotta walk Pocahontas down the aisle. He says, no, I'm too busy. I'll get my brother to do it. So who walked Pocahontas down the aisle? Opie or Opet-Con-Canoe. The man that some people think killed the Jesuits. The man who lived in Spain, Mexico, and Havana. Wow. But again, I'm over here. That's speculation. Don't tell anyone I told you that. You have to go out and buy the books for 2 guys who take that approach to it. Now I'll get back serious here as a historian. We don't know what happened to Don Luis. Don't know. That's an interesting view, but one of Virginia's greatest scholars of Virginia Indians is Helen Roundtree. She just retired from Old Dominion University. She has had an incredible career of books and scholarships. She is the true knowledge of Virginia Indians of this time period. And she, in several articles, says that she does not believe, for many reasons, the possibilities there. All right, I'll bring the plane in for landing. So let the plane land, I'll answer a question real quick. So what happened? Well, remember I said in the 1920s and 30s, the Catholic Diocese of Richmond began a cause of investigation or canonization. The word canonization comes from the Greek word kanon, which means list. When you get canonized, the Pope puts you on the list of saints of the Catholic Church. So what you have to do an intense study of their life to make sure there's no skeletons in the closet, all is good. That's what I've done for almost 20 years. I've gone to Spain where these Jesuits lived, where they studied, where they went to school, where they got ordained priests. I've been to the Caribbean, I've been to Mexico, I've been to Florida, all these places, all finding whatever works referring to them in some of their letters, and all that's submitted to the Vatican. I started in about 2005 working for the Diocese of Richmond, but in 2018, the investigation got moved to the bishops of Florida because technically these Jesuits had not died in Virginia. Virginia didn't exist until 1607. When they died, where did they die? So like a baseball player, I get traded from one team to another without my agent being told. I got a letter one day that the bishops of Florida said, we appoint you to a historical commission. You and the case have been turned over by the Bishop of Richmond. So since 2018, I've worked for Florida. What's interesting about it is there are 58 martyrs who died in North America, Southeast North America, between 1565 and 1705. And of the 58, the majority of them are Native Americans who were baptized, became active in the faith, and then were later put to death by other tribes or by the English who were using tribes as proxy armies. Only of the 58, only about 12 of them are Spanish-born missionaries, including my 8 Jesuits from Virginia. But anyway, I just end by saying the lead martyr, or second lead martyr, died in 1705 in what is today, modern-day, Tallahassee, Florida. He was burned at the stake because he would not renounce Christianity. And as he's burned at the stake, he's preaching the gospel in his native language to his people. Keep the faith, don't give up. And just before he dies, he says, I see a beautiful woman coming towards me, inviting me to heaven. And so it would be a story of a vision of the Blessed Virgin Mary that is documented by witnesses. They said he saw this literally as he was dying. Anyway, Antonio Cupia is his title, but they're known collectively as the Martyrs of La Florida. Whew. Thank you. We covered a lot. Thank you. I'm happy to answer questions. You will the first question.
Yes, I think those Native Americans would say that they had representative government 1,000 years before the English came to. And if they were here today, our friends, I think that's what they say.
You are correct. I sometimes get asked by people, are you a native Virginian? And I say, well, I was born in Alexandria, but I'm not a native Virginian. Actually, Virginia had, as I said earlier, a sophisticated, large native population going back. I've worked with several historians who are involved in the Romer-Comico project. Are you all aware of the Romer-Comico project? Yeah. So, Randy Turner, who's kind of the lead of it, is a dear friend. We email back and forth. We've been in talks together. He's given me great interviews, but when the Jesuits arrived, the question is, why do they want York River? And so we can say probably because that was Don Luis's home, but Randy Turner says actually in his mind, it's because that would be a natural stepping stone to Romer-Comico, which for the natives was their holy city and their political governance. So when the Spanish arrived in 1570, you are correct. There was a sophisticated form of government, and of course, Powhatan's without equal. Powhatan's running of his empire is without equal in Native American history, and that all is Virginia history.
Thank you.
Yes.
Have you toured the St. Vince Church, the Catholic church in this old town?
I have not. I've been to Our Lady of Mount Carmel in Port Louis, but not the other churches.
So the reason I ask is because when you go over to the St. Vince Church, or if you type in St. Alfonso, St. Alfonso is the black Catholic church. So
Okay.
they cut the whole church up and moved it from Marshall in 16th Street, where we see Dunbar Urban and that, and it's oval, like a museum inside of St. Vincent.
Really?
So, right, and then you ask the lady, she says she has, that history cut up as a museum, and they also have the records of St. Martin, some kind of way.
No, I need to come back and keep learning. Like I said,
Right.
I'm a new convert to Newport News. That Mary was showing me the shipyards and showing me down the waterfront and showing me where the trains came through and the Civil War history, but there's a lot of history here. And I need to know my Catholic history because at one time I was working for the Diocese of Richmond.
Yeah,
Thank
all those
you.
stories connect together, and I'll make sure you have Mr. Tanner's number if I need.
No, please, thank you. Thank you,
My
yeah.
number, and this young man will be his number.
Great,
Because he's doing the dig, so
wonderful.
he can work smart, not hard.
The Yorktown Naval Weapons Station, when I spent my day there with their archaeologist, he said that he works with Native Americans associated with the Kiskiak town. But also, he said, after the Civil War, there were many freed slaves that had property there. And he said once a year, they all come back and have a prayer service in the gathering there. And so he said that although everyone thinks he works for the Navy, he said actually also worked for Native Americans and for many families here that trace their heritage back to people who were freed after the Civil War. So there's a lot of great history here. A lot.
You need to make sure you visit Charleston, Virginia.
Okay?
That's right up the street. Like we told a little bit of the history of York County. But right up the street is a road. It's a old York County road.
Okay.
And the old York County road leads right into Charles City. Charles City has the history of King Charles II
Great.
that ties to Chesapeake. So you do some mapping.
No, absolutely. Thanks to Mary, I got my copy, which is now worn out, of when the Yankees came, right? The story of Newport News is told by one of your most famous citizens. Yeah.
The Kiskiaks, representatives of that tribe, come here to our programs occasionally.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah.
Friends.
Virginia has an interesting history with Native Americans. Some groups are recognized, some are not. But nonetheless, I've seen their website. I've never had a chance to meet with anyone of that
Yeah,
tribe.
put you in touch with them.
Please, please, yeah. Any other questions? Now the lights are on, people are awake. Yes. Okay, yes, Debbie.
So, over the last year and a half, I live about a mile from Jamestown. I have heard our tribal council has said it's Opacham. So,
There's several different pronunciations.
so like in Jamestown.
Opie-Compton or OPEC-Compton? I've heard
But we would
both,
say
yeah.
Opacham.
Okay.
So that's why I'm curious.
Even I've heard, like in the Jamestown scholarship area, Yahikin, the name for house in Algonquin.
Yeah, quite often that's said as well.
What's interesting, obviously, when I read the Spanish letters, it's medieval Spanish. And so not only am I trying to pick up an Algonquin word in Spanish, but it's medieval Spanish. Because it wasn't until the Renaissance the Spanish had a universal language, so I'm still learning. But I have 3 Algonquin names in there.
We have 11 state recognized tribes.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
So that they form a council, so that's where the information.
I had a wonderful meeting with, she got a master's degree at Old Dominion. Her name is Jamie, begins with an H, and she at the Jamestown Settlement was not only their liaison to Virginia Indian tribes and historical research, but also she was in charge of the living interpretation. In fact, a couple times in the museum I've seen pictures of her out there too. So I know that when you go to Jamestown Museum now, that is a part of the story that needs to be told. And like I said, growing up, there was not really a mention of the natives other than Pocahontas. But now when you go, they have a whole room of what the culture and history was, and the politics. Yeah. So I'm glad we're keeping